Hi, everybody. Randy Wild here with the Module 14 presentation, the case study involving Dr. Harvey, Miss Tate, a second year teacher, and internet use and making threats through the internet. So, identifying the problem and analyzing the issues going on. First thing, that last paragraph, I want to make sure and be clear that I would not meet with the students in the morning. I wouldn't um, just sit down with the teacher and the students who she was accusing, making this Facebook page. So the heart of the issue was there was a Facebook page that was created with some hurtful information and some possible threats being made to the teacher. There wasn't any evidence that it was a student. There was just some threatening information that was shared through email, and there was a Facebook page created. The first real threat was that the teacher felt threatened, and that was something that I would want to make sure I took seriously. I don't want any of my staff feeling threatened, so I needed to make sure that I took care of the teacher first, get ahead of the problem, and the teacher was blaming a certain student, and kind of inform her there was a process that we need to follow before we get into identifying individual students. So continuing with the investigation, you know, I need to know first of all that my teacher is safe before anything else. I need to seek advice from the superintendent as to how he would like me to handle this situation going forward. And we need to know who's responsible. Obviously, that's getting to the heart of the problem. Who is responsible for the email and the creation of the Facebook page? And we need to know how to stop that page from spreading and being able to be viewed by more people. So there was no real evidence that William did it, and that's why I want to reiterate the fact that Dr. Harvey should not have sat down with the teacher and the students that next morning. Um, we don't know anything yet. We just know that the teacher was feeling threatened. We know that the Facebook page, could really rapidly spread some of this slanderous and libel comments that were made, and that could hurt her career, whether they're true or not. When that information gets out there, that can be threatening to somebody's reputation and their career and future as a teacher. We need to know, was the threat real? You know, and that's something that's going to be very hard to prove, that I'll talk about as the presentation goes on. That was at the forefront of my mind: is was it real, and who is responsible for creating the page? So my plan of action, I would want to meet with the admin, my superintendent, my vice principals, not the student. I would want to alert law enforcement because Mrs. Tate was feeling threatened. And even though it seemed like she kind of calmed down through the phone call, I would want to let them know what was going on, what type of investigation the school was conducting, and that Miss Tate was informed of her rights. I would want to make sure Mrs. Tate knew she had the right to alert the law enforcement, maybe open up a file about the threat so that they're informed and she feels a little safer. And I would want to meet with Mrs. Tate alone or with my vice principal first thing in the morning, just to let her explain to me what she needed to feel safe at work and how I could help her while this investigation was going on. So the plan of action continuing, I would want to alert staff of the situation. They obviously would be kind of on a need to know basis. I would want the staff to just be aware there's an issue with a possible threat over the internet involving a teacher, and we're investigating. And just if they hear students gossiping about it, to kind of make sure that they shut that down and keep the educational process rolling throughout the day. I would want to alert my tech department, and that would probably be done through the superintendent as well, so that the tech department's investigating and trying to track down that email and Facebook page that I printed off, and seeing if they can solve that problem. Does that involve law enforcement, or do we need to kind of consult some outside technical assistance in order to determine where the threat came from? The tech department and law enforcement, if they're successful in detecting the creator of the Facebook page, obviously we would go forward right away. If they were not successful in detecting who made the threat and created the Facebook page, sent the email to the teacher, I think I would move forward with a school assembly of sorts. And obviously this information would be vague, but just be informing the students that a threat was made through a Facebook page. If they hear or see of any of this talk around school, or if they know, then they need to come inform us. And it'll be very private. We won't disclose any other information about it. We would just like to know what some other students have known and heard to kind of support us in our investigation. And then we would want to make sure on our Wi-Fi at the school that we shut down the Facebook access. That would be one way to kind of protect the teacher, and the information that's out there on that page is not allowing students to get on there during the school day. Containing all the information is going to be really important. That's kind of necessary to kind of protect our staff. That's necessary to protect the student. I want to make sure that everything's being kept tight-lipped. So the superintendent obviously is going to practice great confidentiality. My vice principal, the teacher, I don't want the teacher, going to work and gossiping with the other teachers about it. This kind of not only concerns the teacher, but also the possible student that gets identified as well. So just informing the staff how to appropriately handle the gossip and how to maintain the confidentiality of everybody involved. The student assembly, they need to be reminded of their legal actions, their use of technology that's owned by the school, and even if they're using that technology outside of school, how that affects them. They need to know how slander and libel comments, can draw legal action against them, and just the overall digital citizenship of having this technology at their disposal. They need to know how to properly handle it. And I want to make sure that I offer Miss Tate some time away from school. If she's still feeling threatened, if she doesn't feel safe, I want to make sure she knows she doesn't have to jump right into her school day, and she may be face to face with the student that she was accusing, and need to educate her on how to handle that. But while resolving this issue, we have to keep in mind the success of all of our students and the overall success of our school building during the instructional day. So I want to solve this issue, hopefully through the tech department, law enforcement, if a complaint was filed by Mrs. Tate, but solving it without using other students. The fewer students that are brought into the office during this day when they know investigations being going on, or after the assembly, it's brought to their attention that something has happened. So keeping as many other students out of the process is what I would want to do first. I don't want it to disrupt the instructional day. We want to keep the day moving like a normal day. We don't want to let any information out. We don't want students getting wound up about this and worried about it. And we don't want to make it seem like it's any different day. It's, myself, my fellow administrators, possibly the law enforcement and tech team kind of working behind the scenes to resolve these issues. And I want to inform Mrs. Tate, if she does choose to come back to school, how she should interact with that student. And all students, and how she should go about her day in an ethical manner, and make sure that everyone in the school is maintaining confidentiality concerning this subject. The students identified, so this could have been through law enforcement, this could have been through the student admission of guilt, or this could have been through a third party identification from another student. I want to make sure I discuss the disciplinary actions with the superintendent, the vice principal. I would want to contact the students' parents right away, inform them of the situation, so I'd be able to set up a meeting with the parents. And the law enforcement would need to be informed that since there was a file reported by Mrs. Tate, I need to let them know I found a student. I don't know if I would have to disclose the student's name. It would depend on what kind of criminal accusations was made by Mrs. Tate. But I would want to make sure they knew that we had identified a student. And then I would just continue in communication with my superintendent. So we would follow the discipline matrix, making sure that it was fair and consistent of how we would handle any and all threats made towards students and teachers, and obviously kind of gathering that information to make sure that's appropriate, and then educating the student on the real life impacts of the decision that he made by sending the email and creating the page, kind of how that impacts in the real world. I would want to make sure that the student was protected, that the student's family was protected. I don't want the information getting out. Maybe the family would need to come in after school hours, just to make sure we're protecting everybody and their privacy. I would want to make sure the teacher feels safe. Once a student was identified, I would want to make sure the teacher feels safe being around that student. How does she perceive the threat? How do myself and the other school officials perceive the threat? And how we're going to move forward in a professional and ethical manner, handling that student and other students that could have been involved. And then scheduling a presentation, I think, for the student body about digital citizenship, about internet issues, about laws, similar to slander and libel for written and verbal communication or threats made to other people. Make sure they're just aware. This would be a great learning opportunity for everybody. And I would want to reflect myself on the student issues. How do we determine if the threat was real? There's not a one way ticket to go about that. We can take the teacher's word and how they felt reading the threat, how law enforcement, or what the student told us. But that's a very tricky situation determining if the threat was real. And how will those comments and how many people saw those comments about the teacher, whether they were true or not, that could affect her future. And she could be scared to be around that student still. And it could affect the public's opinion of her. And is the student in any legal trouble? How is it going to be handled, not just with the discipline matrix at the school, but if a file was reported to law enforcement, what kind of legal implications does the student have? One of my major concerns with this is I would just want to make sure that confidentiality of the student was protected at all times. Nobody needs to know details. Even when the student was identified, nobody needs to know why the student or the family came to the school or why we're meeting with them. We want to maintain confidentiality at all costs. And how will I limit the disruption during the school day? Like I said, avoiding the student involvement, avoiding the assembly, avoiding revoking privileges from the students would be first. And hopefully we can find the guilty party through the technology team. And then make sure this is a learning opportunity for the students, the staff, how to handle these kind of situations in the future. And then what are my legal obligations? Do I legally have to inform the law enforcement? I would want to make sure and have that conversation with my superintendent and with the law enforcement agency of how we're going to handle these situations in the future. And there are some unresolved issues. Was the threat, was it real? And how would we ever know? And does it matter? Is the law enforcement and the superintendent's policy going to be, we're handling this in a certain way, whether we know the threat was real or not? A threat was made, how it could be perceived when she said, who wants to see her, when the student said on the Facebook page, who wants to see Mrs. Tate disappear? How do you determine if that was a real threat on her life or her safety? And then, can Mrs. Tate continue to be around this student in the classroom? It's something that I wanted to reflect on as well. And how would I coach a teacher through that situation? I took the threat very seriously. I wanted to inform Mrs. Tate of her rights. She can notify law enforcement. I would be in the loop with law enforcement. And my approach would be to not disrupt the student day with a witch hunt where we're going to be investigating every student in every classroom to find out who it was. I wanted to avoid other student involvement at all costs. And keep everybody on a need-to-know basis. This is an administrative job. Tech team might be involved, and that should kind of be the limit until we exhaust all those resources. And I did not want to punish the whole student body. I didn't want to take their Chromebooks away. I didn't want to shut off the Wi-Fi during the school day. We wanted to limit Facebook access so it didn't affect the instructional process of the day like we would on any other day. And I wanted to make sure I followed the discipline matrix. There's guidelines in the discipline matrix at our school for discipline concerning threats to student and staffs, and that's how we would follow it. And then make sure we're meeting with the family. The family deserves to be in the loop. They need to know their rights and their students' rights. And so a meeting with the family and student would be very important. And acting in an ethical manner, maintaining the need-to-know basis was important with staff and students. It can be very vague information handed out concerning the situation without releasing any privacy of the student. Following the discipline matrix was important ethical behavior, and educating the students, the staff, the student that created the page, the teacher involved, and everybody in between on professional and ethical behavior using the internet. So in conclusions, this had some very real life examples that could be faced by a building leader. There wasn't one easy solution or path to resolve this. The legal matters could go one way or the other. You could interpret the comments on the page one way or the other. And you could try to get it done through the use of the tech team, or, law enforcement may have stepped in depending on how they determine the threats. There wasn't one clear-cut way to solve this issue. And Mr. Harvey, Dr. Harvey, really jumped the gun by just telling the teacher, we're going to sit down with the student that you think is guilty. That was something that was not good practice, and I would not advise any administrator to just take a teacher's word for who they think created a Facebook page with no real evidence. You know, you could bring in legal action from parents